Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Vorse, coming to you live from our Church Militant studios here in Detroit, Michigan. Well, what to say about the New York Times hit piece on Church Militant last week, written by their religion writer, Samuel Friedman? Well, for starters, judging by the New York Times penchant for outright lying and plagiarism and false reporting, it was somewhat mild. For those who may not remember, in 2003, a reporter for the New York Times by the name of Jason Blair got exposed for doing all of the above: plagiarizing, lying, meaning making up quotes out of thin air, and writing a number of stories that were flat out false. Once exposed, he was canned. But shortly after that, executive editor Howell Raines and managing editor Gerald Boyd turned in their own resignations, owing to the newsroom breakdowns that permitted someone like Blair to get away with such unethical practices for so long. Blair even recently admitted last year that he was surprised when he did it the first time that no one in the news operation caught it. And then after he had done it once, it was easier to just keep doing it over and over again. To quote him directly, quote, "I was too arrogant. That arrogance blinded me to a lot of my weaknesses. Once you do something that crosses any ethical line, it is easy to go back and do it over and over. I danced around it and then crossed it and had a real hard time coming back," closed quote. Well, good for Blair for at least publicly acknowledging it. Which brings us back to the New York Times and the recent slime piece done on us here at Church Militant. Now, there is Blair's way of lying, which is outright and direct, and then there's the usual way of lying, which goes on every day in the secular mainstream liberal media world, and that's by presenting elements of a story in such a way that the reader is given an impression of truth, intended or not. This is the way things are done, business as usual in that world, and I know because I worked in it for 20 plus years. When you look at this article, it is heavy on adjectives chosen to inflame, but presented, sort of matter-of-factly. For example, we are extremist, a hate group, strident, right-wing, and hardcore. We oppose Catholic policy, are the subject of criticism from so-called Catholic scholars. And catch this latest term in the liberal lexicon, we are subjects of criticism from anti-hate advocates. You can probably expect to read that more in the pages of the New York Times. That, of course, refers to those noble souls of liberal elitism who go around self-righteously pinpointing haters. The more you get exposed to this liberal logic, the more you drop to your knees and thank heaven that Clinton and the Democrats got their clocks cleaned. This stuff could have been the law of the land. As it is right now, it's still just the talking points of the moronic babbling from the left. Another tactic is to misquote or quote out of context a person whom readers would consider to be an ally about the subject of the report. This serves as the great purpose of casting doubt by saying, well, look, even someone who should agree with them thinks they're nuts. The Times did this in this report by using a quote from theology professor John Cavadini at Notre Dame, whose responses they manipulated to try and give the impression that we here at Church Militant are distorting the actual theological meaning of the Church Militant. Professor Cavadini gave a superb explanation of the Church Militant in theological terms, which exactly coincided with the one I gave during the interview, the one that Friedman chose not to print. He also told the Times that sometimes there's an intersection of this theological concept with the secular world. As he put it, that spiritual struggle sometimes requires social and political correlates. But they chose not to print that further explanation. How do I know? Well, because I communicated with Professor Cavadini after the article came out, and he told me that he told them that. So let's be clear. Professor Cavadini told them two major things on this point of the Church Militant. They chose to print one and not the other. That first and foremost, it is spiritual, fighting the enemy and the evil within. That's the one they chose to print. It's the same thing I told them, as can be seen on the transcript of the interview that I gave them by clicking on the link here. Then he said, Professor Cavadini, that this battle is sometimes fought in social and political circles, which again is the same thing I told the New York Times. That portion they did choose to print. Yet the New York Times made the conscious and deliberate choice to turn our double agreement instead into a clash, because that would help to discredit me and our work, which was the point of the article. In their story construct, Good Catholic Cavadini says Church Militant is all about the spiritual. Right-wing hater nutjob Voris says it's all about politics and excuses to promote hate and extremism and anti-Semitism, not one word of which is true. And see, this is why people don't trust liberal reporters and publications and networks. It's why when Trump said, "Look at all those liberals," everybody immediately responded to it. How is this different in substance from what Jason Blair did? He made up quotes to create a story where none existed. Friedman neatly cherry picks and rearranges quotes to create a story where none exists. From there, the Times goes on to pepper in some quotes from liberal Jewish and Catholic scholars and experts who are thrown in to pile on and bring home the point that Church Militant and this theology aren't to be trusted. Whatever. For once, I'd like to have a serious debate about what we actually do say. The Catholic Church is established by Jesus Christ, who is the Son of God, and outside of it, there is no salvation. But very few, in and out of the church, want to have that discussion because too much would be revealed by it. Which is why we're going to keep pressing the point, regardless of what slipshod, biased, lazy, agenda-driven reporting stories and articles are written about us. So in closing, we'd like to thank the leftist extreme, hate-mongering, misquoting, misreporting, quoting out of context, agenda-driven, posing as authentic news, New York Times, for all the free publicity, not to mention the extra donations and subscribers we got. We appreciate it. Not only for the pub, but also for providing one more example of your bias that you refuse to admit you have, but everyone else knows you have. We were wondering, could you tell us again, what did Jason Blair do that was so wrong that he was fired, along with the rest of your news leadership who had to hand in their resignations? Because we're not very clear on exactly what's changed. And neither, apparently, is 91% of the rest of America, the number who told pollsters during the recent election that they don't trust the media. God love you. I'm Michael Voris.